Welcome to Creativity in the Enneagram. I'm Samantha Mackay, a certified Enneagram coach with Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy and unconventional life coach. I am deeply curious about the role of creativity in our lives, as creative expression is just such a core part of who we are as humans, and yet it's something that many of us struggle to truly embrace or engage in, including me. So, with this series, I'm hoping to understand what creativity can look like beyond the traditional characterization of creativity as being painting or drawing. So, I'm interviewing people of each Enneagram subtype to explore creativity through the lens of our ego's inner protection system, as well as through the cultural lens we grew up in and what stage of life we're in. These chats, we don't spend much time talking about the type or the characteristics of the subtype. If you'd like more information on that, I've included some links in the description below. In this interview, I'm talking with Samantha, a Sexual Two, a journalism student with a variety of creative practices. And I really loved seeing the two's desire for connection, how that shone through in her journalism work, as well as how she dances with the two's need for positive feedback and validation. And definitely stay tuned to hear how she wrangles with creative blocks. That's definitely a tip I'm going to be taking on board. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Today I'm talking with Sam. Sam is a Sexual Two, and we're talking about creativity in the Enneagram. She's a journalist student and a documentary maker, and I'm very excited to hear more about both of those. And I'll include a link to her website in the notes. Thank you for talking to me about creativity in the Enneagram today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So the first question I tend to ask is, what does creativity mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. To me, creativity means connecting to yourself and expressing that in a way that maybe isn't traditional. To me, that's either my art or my music, but I also feel like it's the way I approach my journalism and my documentary making and when I'm interacting with people. I think it's when I get that sense of intuition or that little hit of, oh, this could be an interesting path to follow. And then going down that and kind of exploring what's down there. I think it's more like a feeling or an essence. And I think that's the best way I would
Mm.
describe.
So sort of following a feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that feeling it sounds like there's a sense of curiosity there to it, but I feel like that's sort of like a head center's way of describing it. Like, so what does
Mm.
that feeling feel like to you?
Yeah. I think I see how it could come across as a head center description. To me, it's like very in the heart. There is a curiosity there, but it's almost like it's not a desire to know, it's more a desire to resolve, like, a feeling. And so, for instance, if I'm talking to someone and I'm doing an interview for a documentary or a journalism piece, I'll just get the sensation of, "Oh, I'm connecting with this person, and I feel like this is an interesting story they're telling, but, like, there's more to it." And so I'll kind of, like, take a creative approach when I'm connecting with them. So maybe I'll start telling them about my own experience with that, or maybe I'll like ask them a completely unrelated question and see if they bring it back to that, or maybe I'll disagree with them on purpose and then see how they respond. It's very exciting, like curiosity. It's almost like I know that there's an answer there. I can feel that there's an answer there. And then creativity helps me get to that. And then I like feel this like resolve in my heart center.
I love that description of it. And I think from my perspective, it's really interesting how it could very much sound like the head's approach of searching for a piece of information, but it's actually the heart seeking a sense of like connection.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to explain because I don't really know what it is in the head, and it's honestly like I don't really
Of
care, and
course.
I can
Yeah.
yeah, it get kind of hard because sometimes if I'm working with someone else and they want a bite for the interview or they have an idea of what the interview is going to be like, I usually abandon that because 'cause I'm like, "Well, wait, I feel like it's over here." And usually ends up being okay. But yeah, I won't often know or have an idea of what's going to happen. It really just will happen in the heart space and in the exchange with the other person. And what I also find is when I'm interviewing 2 people, it's really difficult for me because I can't really focus on one of the people, and this might be where my sexual subtype comes in a little bit, is I
Mm.
feel like I can almost merge with the person and really connect with them on a heart center level. And when there's two people, I'm like switching back and forth. So I've learned to always do a solo interview after I do an interview with two people because otherwise I can't like fully get the essence of
Mm.
the trying to say.
Yeah. That group dynamic is more challenging. Out of curiosity, do you know if your social is second or third in the sequence?
The social is second. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think like it's still it's manageable, it's okay, but they're just not as good as my other interviews.
So
The
you
ones
don't feel like it's your best work at this point in time. And do you make any like art or projects by yourself? Or is it
I do.
always
Yeah.
with someone?
Yeah. My work is usually telling stories or helping other people tell their stories. So a lot of interviews, a lot of research or investigating. And then I have art that I keep pretty separate from my work life. So I paint a lot, I do a lot of watercolor, I play guitar and I play music and I write songs sometimes. So those are very private practices that I don't often include other people in because it's a lot easier to channel my own emotion when I'm not around other people.
I first just want to call out what you said, helping other people tell their stories. I can see why that could fit really well for a two and maybe even a sexual two in some way, because there is that connection to the other and that person's story. And then I love what you said about your own work is just to help you channel your feelings, which is obviously much harder to do when you're in relationship in some form.
Yeah, and I find that solo practice helps me do my other job better because if I'm always trying to be very empathetic and trying to draw out the emotions and the stories from other people, I need some sort of outlet that helps me then channel my own feelings. Yeah, having that private creative time is also really important to me.
So two questions. Do you share that private creative work with anyone or is it just for you?
Yeah, I do share it, but I only share it once it's finished, which just kind of started happening naturally. So I used to sell little watercolor cards on Etsy or in a few stores, but I wouldn't do commissions. So having those boundaries where, okay, I would paint for myself and create what I want to create. And then, yes, I would share it with people, but I
Okay.
wouldn't involve people in the process of making it. I think that was really important for me. And
Hmm.
then same with my music. I'll write songs and record them, but I won't share them until I feel like I fully resolved the situation. They're usually like situational songs, like something happened, I feel emotional, I write a song, and then I'm fine with sharing it with people, but only after it's complete.
Once the emotion's complete.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, you've known that you're a two for a while, you've known you're a sexual two for about 6 months. And I'm wondering if this personal creative practice sort of developed once you knew that to help balance things out, or was it already happening?
Mm. No, it was already happening. I grew up homeschooled with a lot of creativity and authority over my own time. And so I had the opportunity to really develop practices that served me. So I painted a lot as a kid. I would go for really long walks in nature. I started playing guitar when I was 12, and so I started working on these things at a pretty young age, and then as I started to get busier, I started to get more sad as well. And I remember thinking to myself one day, I was like, "Why do I always feel better when I'm, like, playing guitar, like, when I'm doing art or when I'm doing these little things?" And then I realized, "Oh, yeah, because they're, like, actually fueling the rest of my life." And so now it's really important for me to make time for those things. So I don't think it was my type figuring out my type that helped me restate those processes. It was more not having them really just wasn't working for me, and I wasn't as excited about life as I usually was. So, yeah, that's when I started making time for them more intentionally.
I do find that we're naturally drawn to the things that will help us, even when we don't know our Enneagram type. We often feel called to certain things, and it's good that you already had that to fall back on and to sort of know what was missing as you sort of shifted into that stage of life. I am curious, how did knowing your Enneagram type, whether it be the two or the sexual two, start to change or shape your relationship to creativity?
Think in a strange way, it gave me more permission to be more dramatic with my creativity, which sounds kind of like a poor answer, but like this having knowing about sexual subtypes gave me permission to feel a lot of the feelings I was feeling. And so if I would have this like intense exchange with a person and feel it really deeply and feel really connected to them and understand what's going on in the situation, and maybe some of that was coming from the sexual instinct, instead of feeling like shameful or insecure about like having all the feelings, I would just like put it in a song and be like, okay, like it's normal that I have these feelings. This is where it's coming from. Here's a healthy way to express it. So I think it just gave me permission to one, know that I was a heart type and know that okay, maybe I do feel things on a higher level or a deeper level than other types. And then also to like not be ashamed of having a need to express it.
Well, and I think sexual twos are pretty dramatic anyway. I think that's sort of
Yeah,
built
we
into
are.
that pattern to some extent. So I think it's really important to highlight how part of our work with the Enneagram is to give ourselves permission to be our type. Like that's a
Mhm.
really important part of the process. So I think it's been great that you've been able to do that and have been able to highlight that. It's really essential.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very nice that I can include my the gifts I get from my type in my work as well, because when I'm talking, I mean, right now I'm still in school, but when I'm talking to professors or to my supervisors at my internships or whatnot, they'll usually comment on my interviews. They'll be like, wow, like you either pick really good subjects or you're just a really good interviewer. Like your pieces have, I'm not the best like producer or the best editor, but like my pieces have really strong central characters and they really, there's a level of vulnerability in the pieces that I don't think is that traditional for a journalist who's so young and so new to the field. And so I
Mm.
think being able to lean into my ability to connect with people and ask really intentional, in tune questions, I think that is helping my practice along. And knowing I'm a sexual two and knowing those are my strengths is helpful because otherwise I could picture myself like focusing really hard on, okay, well, I'm not like the best photographer and I need to get better at this, or, I'm not the best sound editor, I need to get better at this. And yes, I'm still working on those skills, but I think also leaning into like the people aspect. That's why I started journalism and that's what excites me about it. I think that's really validating too to know, okay, this is my type and this is how it can help in my work.
I think that's so important, especially at that point where we're trying to figure out our path. And it's so easy to
Mhm.
look at everyone around us and think, I don't have that. And so when you
Yeah.
can look back and go, actually, no, this is my strength. Let's keep reminding myself that that's my strength and keep giving ourselves permission to use it. It can really make a difference as to how that stage of our lives goes.
And it's interesting too, in my classes, they're quite small now because I'm a senior. So there are like 5 or 6 people in my classes right now. And it's nice because we all help each other out a lot. So, and I know now one of my contributions is being able to connect people to other people. So we'll have these little pitches in class. We'll be talking about our stories and what our struggles are. Now we're like, oh, like I know a person that can help with this, or hey, like, can I connect you to this professor? And just, I mean, one, knowing like my desire to help is natural, and then also, like, not getting too carried away with that, I think is important for me, but also knowing that is a valid contribution, and I think my professors stress that as well, that, okay, like, some people are better at cameras, some people are better at this, some people are better at that, and one of the things they say is some people are really good at picking subjects and connecting people, and I'm really glad that that is something that's acknowledged and respected.
I feel like we've discussed this a bit, but what supports you to be creative?
I think having people around me who appreciate my creativity is really helpful for my work aspect, and like I said, having people acknowledge, "Oh, this is something that you're good at," or, "This is one of your strengths here." I think that encourages me to bring it into my work more than I happen in classes where, it's very by the books and there's not a lot of room to be creative or to bring my love for people into the space, and my work is just terrible. Like, it's just not a good class. And so I think having like that feedback loop is really important to me to keep doing it and keep wanting to put my best work out there. And then for my personal creativity, I think just making the time and realizing how fulfilling it is. And then also, yeah, that I can get really dispirited or really drained when I don't have that outlet. And I notice, I mean, I grew up in a very small town in Maryland. Now I live in New York City. And something I'll do when I can kind of tell when I'm getting drained and I maybe need some creative time, I'll just start like wanting to help everyone. Like I'll be on the street and like, "Oh my god, like, can I, like, help you with your bag?" Or like, "Oh, like, can I give you, like, some money?" Or, "Oh, let me hold the door for you." Like, I'll just be putting out so much energy in ways that it's not I mean, not sustainable. And, like, I'll know, okay, an hour after that when you get home, you're gonna crash. So, like, why don't instead of, like, putting it out there, why don't you, like, go do something? Like, go play your guitar, like, go paint, even, like, journaling or writing. Yeah, so I think just making the time preventively is really helpful to have a good solid relationship with creativity.
Also being able to spot when you're overgiving, you know,
Yeah.
and go, right, okay, this is time to do some more inner work. Let's do some creative expression, process those feelings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And so is that like how you manage sort of creative blocks, or do you have a different approach for when that happens?
I feel very lucky that I have different expressions of creativity. So usually if I have a creative block, it just means I'm not using the right expression. So
Right.
if I'm trying to write a piece and I'm just like not there, I'll switch to something else. So maybe I'll switch to like an audio project, or maybe I'll just like start playing guitar to like get my mind into
Mm.
the right space. For me, also talking to people is really helpful. So if I'm working on a documentary and I'm trying to connect pieces and they're just not connecting and I don't really know why, I'll just call someone who I know I can think well with and we'll just like talk it out together. And just hearing someone else's perspective and getting like another voice in the room usually helps my own, because either I'll agree or disagree and that will like help my own creativity kind of flow. So yeah, I'll either switch forms or I'll involve someone else and see if that sparks anything.
Mm. Those are both great techniques. I think those are really useful. And I think it is so great that you can have all these different things to switch between to see what might flow elsewhere, because that almost takes any guilt or shame away from the sense of this should be working. It's like, oh no, I'm just in the wrong medium. Let's just switch mediums and
Yeah.
see what flows. That brings a lot of
Yeah.
permission into the piece and takes out the judgment.
And I think for me also, space is really important where I'm working and where I'm doing things. So sometimes changing environments and who I'm around also really helps. If I'm in my apartment and it's not working, I'll go out to a coffee shop or go to the library or just kind of or go to the park and switch up what's around me. And that usually helps. I feel like there's never been a block I can't solve by like
Mm.
changing my space or changing the form.
So are there any other aspects of working with two in that creative expression that you've found tricky, or like you've had to put some effort into navigating or changing focus in some way? Because I know the two is obviously very other focused. Like how is that playing out for you?
Yeah, I think creativity can sometimes be tied to the product versus the process. And sometimes, I mean, this was when I was a little bit younger, but I would be very focused on what the product is and what the response is. And so, I'm thinking about when I was selling my cards and I would paint these watercolors and I would feel really great about them. And then I would print them and take them to the store and people would respond really well to them. Then it kind of became about the other people's response and wanting to get that validation and that approval from other people. And then it wasn't about my process anymore. And so I think that's why for me, it's really important to have some creativity that's separate from my work, because I love putting stuff out into the world. And I mean, I do like getting positive feedback and validation, but I really like having private practices that don't necessarily involve other people, because for me, that's a slippery slope of almost like removing creativity from the process because I'm just focused on the result versus what it's doing for me and how it's helping me express my feelings.
So that validation piece, which at times is obviously really important to a two. Twos need a lot of positive affirmation and feedback, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's useful, obviously, to know when it's tripping up or getting in the way of what you're trying to do, which is emotional processing, really.
Mhm. Yeah, and I noticed too, when I was using painting to get that feedback, then I would have to integrate some other process for myself. So that's when I kind of started playing guitar more, or that's when I started writing more. Now, yeah, I got really into nonfiction creative writing, and I took a class in it, and the teacher really liked my work, and the students really liked my work. And that felt really good, but it was also really bad for my relationship to writing, because then I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to sit down and write this piece. And oh, I think so and so will like relate to this aspect. No, I think the teacher will really like this part. And that was okay for class, but I needed a separate process that was about me and expressing myself, because that writing then wasn't about me anymore. It was about, okay, how am I going to get other people's reactions or other people's connections to this piece?
That sounds like a really important observation and realization, but piece of inner work, because at times that seeking of the other can really undermine what we're trying to create in
Mm-hmm.
some way, like whether it's for public
Yeah.
consumption or not.
I think for me, it does make my work better, especially because my part of my job is to communicate to other people. So I think there is a time in the process of making the work where thinking about the other person is helpful, because it does
Mm.
reach the broadest audience, and I think it does make it better. But then I just need to make sure I have a separate outlet that's not about the other people or about getting validation for the work. And it's more just about, okay, do I like this? Did I get something from this? Did I feel creative doing it? Yeah, and have it not be tied to the results or what other people think of the results.
Good balance to strike there. So, my last question is, what creation are you most proud of?
I worked on a documentary about fatherhood, and I interviewed 5 fathers, their relationships with their dads, and growing up in households that didn't allow them to be very emotionally expressive, and how they are navigating that as they're trying to raise their sons and instill more vulnerability, more expression, and just more allowance to be themselves. And that was probably one of the hardest journalism projects I've done, because the interviews, they were so beautiful, but they were so intense. I remember I scheduled 2 interviews in the same day, and after the second one, I was like, "There's no way I can do another one of these." Like, I was just so in the other person's energy, and I'm very grateful they were so vulnerable and so open, and they all ended up crying during the interviews, and we got to, like, very it almost felt like a therapy session, like, we got to very deep places.
Right.
And, when I finished the documentary, I didn't really wanna show it to anyone because, it was for class, and I was proud of the interviews I did and the work I did, but I didn't think the production value was that good, and it was my first video. But I ended up showing it to some friends, and they kind of spread it around to different people, and it kind of started to grow. And people's responses were they either, like, got emotional, or they called their dads and talked to their dads and, like, had conversations with them. And I think for me, sometimes I forget that my work can I mean, if I show my work to a person, it's usually because I want their reaction in some way, or I want the exchange. But it was really interesting to see that my work could have ripples that were outside of my control and outside of like a one-on-one connection. And I kind of liked the fact that I wasn't involved in the work at all. Yes, my name was on it, but no one really knew who I was. My voice wasn't in it, and my personal story wasn't in it. So I could create something. I could use the tools I have in my creativity to create something that had an effect on people, but it didn't have to be tied back to me. And I think that was a really cool experience that I was really proud of.
So, it was like there's almost three parts that you're proud of: is the interviews itself, the impact it had on people you'd never like hadn't directly connected to, and also that you weren't at the center of it, that there was a separation between you and the work in some way that you feel proud
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, because if you think of twos and pride, I think sometimes I do get a little bit attached to my work and how it's going to land for other people. And it was kind of nice to not want to show the work and keep it private and then having it be showed anyway. And it had some sort of response and it surprised me. And I wasn't trying to control the interaction or control what the person was going to feel in response. They just had this response. And if I think about it, that is why I made it. I was trying to spread awareness and trying to encourage people to connect more with their fathers. But I kind of forgot about that along the way. So then when it actually happened, it wasn't anything I did directly. It's just was the result of the piece.
I really like it how it's all about connection, and you can see that theme throughout every piece of that project. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me about creativity today. I've loved hearing about it from your perspective, and it sounds like you're doing great creative projects and putting wonderful things out in the world. So best of luck with it all.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to chat. So nice to be here. Always a pleasure to talk to another Sam. Yeah, and yeah, you asked great questions. I really enjoyed talking with you.